Hello ladies and gentlemen, today we're back in War Thunder looking at another new aircraft. This is the P-51H-5NA. It sits at rank 4, battle rating 6.7, and I think the best way to describe it is really the jewel in the crown of the aviation tree for America, or at least in my opinion. It is the first 6.7 fighter that we've had in a while, or at least on launch, and it really proves to be something fierce. Even stock, the P-51H, I have found has been one of the most entertaining aircraft that has been added to the game over this past year. And this is down to some personal things, and also down to some just raw talent of the plane itself in-game. So, from the personal side, when I first started playing War Thunder, I played a lot of the United Kingdom or Great Britain, and the reason for this is because that's all of the aircraft I knew historically. I'd done a lot of research on the Spitfires, and also the Hurricanes, looking at the later stage Griffin Spits, and even into the Meteor series of aircraft. But I didn't really look into realistic battles until I hit maybe tier 3 of Great Britain, and I started using the Typhoon, the Spitfire, and the Spitfire F Mark 9, and people were suggesting, you play a lot of arcade, why not try a bit of realistic? So I did, and through learning using the Spitfire and the Typhoon, I was able to learn how to turn fight, I was able to learn how to energy fight, and then moving on, I researched the Tempest Mark 5. Now you must understand, this is about 3.5 years ago. The trees looked completely different in War Thunder, and the Tempest Mark 5 was the gem for me. It was the aircraft I loved flying, and still love flying. It was one of the first rank 4 aircrafts that I actually aced out with my non-premium account. I played it so much. With 420mm Hispanos and a lot of energy behind it, and once you got that engine injection upgrade, it soared through the air. And it was the first fighter that I felt I could actually fight Bearcats in. Now Bearcats were a hell of a lot different back then. They had a much more powerful flight model in the game. They were the cream of the crop when it came to American props. Nowadays, we have the P-51, we have the Tiger Cats, so maybe the argument can be, a bit more in their favor than the Bearcats. Also, the Bearcats have gone through many iterations of flight model changes, and therefore aren't the force that they used to be. But when I was using stuff like the Spitfire LF Mark 9, the Spitfire F Mark 16, I was struggling so much against Bearcats. But once I got the Tempest Mark 5, it felt like the tables had turned. It felt like I was fighting on a level playing field. I could get an energy advantage over a Bearcat. They could climb higher than me, they could turn faster than me, but I knew I could catch them out. Whereas in some of those old Spitfires, before the Griffins existed, before the naval armed forces of the aviation tree, or the Fleet Air Arms, whatever you want to call them for Britain, was in the game, the Tempest was the only thing you could go to be able to combat Bearcats and also deal with all the B-17s flying at your face. Now fast forward to today, we had a very similar situation in the game. The Spitfire Griffins were added. The Spitfire F Mark 24 and Mark 22 were added, seen as the best props in the game. And undoubtedly, I think they were. They had no real competition from Germany. They had a little bit of competition from Japan, but never really fought them. There's no competition from Italy. And there's no competition from Russia. The only real competition that the Griffin Spits had was against jets, because they don't match too well up against jets. But now, we have a propeller plane in-game, the P-51H-5NA, which matches well against the Griffin Spits. It is another one of those scenarios, the Tempest and the Bearcat, where you can get an altitude advantage, you can get an energy advantage, you can turn better than them in the P-51 compared to the Griffins, but the Griffins can do that to you too. And a lot of it then comes down to modifications, and also the majority of it comes down to the skill of the pilot. When I'm flying this P-51H against Griffin Spitz and Tempests, I feel like I have a real fighting chance of taking down a hell of a lot of them. I feel like I'm fighting on a balanced playing field. Whereas before, with the American tree, with the Bearcats getting worse, with the Tiger Cats airspawn being taken away from them, there was nothing at 6-7 apart from jets which could at least try and deal with a Griffin Spitz. So now we have a wonderful matchup. The P-51H and the Spitfire Mark 24 is an amazing matchup to fight. It is really fun to play on Hokkaido, and the P-51 is one of the planes which has harpened me back to the old days of War Thunder, where I played a lot of the P-51Ds, the early P-47s, the Tempest, and even the BF-109 G2 Trop, where you can get an advantage with your superior climb, and then you can use it to batter down the enemies until they're all gone. So let's go through some statistics on the P-51H. Your dive speed can go up to 800 kilometers an hour and slightly higher. Therefore, you can dive about the same as anything else you're going to fight in the Propeller region. The turn time is deceptive. With combat flaps, you can actually open them at 550 kilometers an hour. 600, yeah, they may fall off, but 550 for combat flaps is something unheard of in the game, in my opinion. There may be some aircraft out there which can, but I haven't found it. This means your first turn advantage and second turn advantage can easily beat Griffin Spitz as long as you are on a level playing field with energy. And also, the P-51H has a comparable rate of climb to the Griffin Spitz and everything else at this tier. It's just wonderful. The stats speak for themselves with this thing. The only issue you're going to have, stat-wise, with the P-51 is if you are below the 350 or 400 kilometers an hour, which won't happen that much. And what will happen is you'll get the old P-51D syndrome, where you'll get the wobble, you'll think that your fuselage is made out of lead, and your wings just kind of wobble around, and you find it hard to turn. This is where you have to change to manual controls and push the elevator full to be able to get that nice turn in. It's also armed with 6 50 cals, the 12.7mm M2 Brownings, the lasers, as they used to be known, because the tracer belt of API-T, and that's it, creates this wonderful wall of red, which is nice to see. Now, I have seen some people experimenting with stealth, I have seen some people experimenting with the universal, but in my opinion, the best belt still is the API-T. It sets fires a lot. You can see where you're shooting, which is very useful when you have 1880 rounds, and you do a lot of damage to wings of planes and main fuselages and engines. It is an all-purpose round. You can go after basically anything you feel like, whether it be ground targets, soft ground targets, fighters, attackers, bombers, anything, and you're going to do a lot of damage to them. Also, with 650 cals means you have a lot of bullets flying out of the chamber at the same time. This means that your burst mass on your guns is very high, meaning that you can take out planes very, very easily. What is also interesting about the P-51H is that it gets a bunch of different bomb loads. Now, for this review, I only researched everything apart from the bomb loads because I wanted to take it from an air realistic point of view, but understanding ground realistic, the P-51H is also very, very good. The fact that it's able to carry the rocket launcher M10s, the FRCs, and also a bunch of different types of bombs. I mean, you can take 6 HVARs and 2 500s, even with the nerf to the rockets, that's still going to do a lot of damage, and if you're struggling, you can always take the bazookas. So, in ground forces, in realistic battles, what is also kind of interesting, where a lot of people using the P-47Ns and Ms because they carry a lot of bombs and ordnance, at 6.7 you have a killer lineup for the Americans when it comes to their ground forces. T-34, T-29, T-114, T95, M26E1, M56, Ontos, T92. You have all of these beautiful machines, including the Duster, to set up a nice 3-man or 3-crew lineup on ground forces. And you need planes to back that up. Now, as I said, a lot of people used to go to the P-47Ns and the P-51s, the lower ones. Now you have a different option in the P-51H. Yes, you do lose out a little bit on bomb load, especially if you're comparing it to the P-47Ns, but what you are getting is once you drop all your bombs, you're going to be king of the sky. The only thing that's going to be able to stop you is fighters who have come in without ordnance and have an energy advantage on you because they spawned in a little bit higher and dive on the battlefield. Everything else the P-51H will mop up. And also, with the API-T rounds, if you decide to use them, they also penetrate 23mm. If you want a little bit more, the ground target belts pen 26, and that's basically the AP rounds that you see in the ground targets belts. But I think tracers with 23mm is sufficient to kill any light ground targets and any AA that you will see at the BR of 6.7. So not only is it a wonderful aircraft to face propeller versus propeller and air realistic, it's also an aircraft you can add into a really nice ground realistic lineup that you can see in developing for the Americans. So where do the issues come in for the P-51H? First of all, the WEP is very good. It only lasts around 6 to 7 minutes, but it will get you to the altitude that you need to. What I generally do is WEP for about 3 minutes, get to about 4,000 meters by climbing at around 15 degrees, shut off the WEP, and then turn it back on when I need it in fights. That seems to work out pretty well for me. But the issues come in on the P-51H when jets start flying around, and this is just an inherent problem that has been in the game for a long time, and it looks like it's not going to go away, basically because people want faster matches, which is a completely understandable point of view. One of the things that really stops stuff like the Spitfire Mark 24s looking as good as they should, the P-51H looking as good as it should, also stuff like the J7, W1, and the Ki-84 High, is that they get matched up against jets. And even the lower tiered jets, if they are fully upgraded, they're going to batter you around. And therefore you have to hope that that jet pilot either has or is not very skilled, or has no upgrades, or has very few upgrades. If they have any decent amount of upgrades on their jets, or they have a half-decent pilot, you are really going to struggle against them, just because of the amount of power the jets bring to the arena against these propeller aircraft. Now yes, you can outturn them. Sometimes you will be able to get in head-ons and get lucky, but the issue is that there is such a difference between even the early jets and the super props in the form of the P-51H that it doesn't feel fun to play. You are constantly playing on a defensive... You can never be aggressive against jets, because if you do, they just run away. One of the worst matchups that the P-51H gets into is when it gets matched up against Germany and Italy at 7.3. Because what happens is F-84Gs start flying around, they get an air spawn for some weird reason, which I would love somebody to explain to me, but the F-84G-21RE will just murder you. There is nothing you can do against that aircraft unless the pilot cocks up. And I don't like it where I'm in an aircraft and I feel powerful, or I hope to be powerful, and I have to wait for an enemy to make a mistake. I would rather be the proactive party in an engagement, set up a kill, and be able to go after them. And then the P-51H, you can do this against any propeller plane, but you cannot do it against certain jet aircraft. The ME-262, you can kind of do it against if you have all of the performance upgrades, and you get a significant dive advantage on it. The Horton you can't. The Arado will hit you 2 minutes into the battle, so good luck with that. The F-84G will hit you a minute and a half into the battle, so watch out for that. And they'll have massive supreme energy advantages over you. So therefore, you are just playing this complete defensive game, which is not fun to play if you're in a propeller aircraft. It is the same critique I would have of the Mark 24 Spitz, the Yak 3VK, which I saw somehow got into a jet game earlier on. Anything that is around this BR, which is a propeller aircraft, has the issue that it will get into jet games. Now, there are certain jets out there, such as the Yak 15P, Yak 17, when fully upgraded, you can still deal with in a propeller plane, but they are very much the minority. I've advocated in the past that there should be a wall between jets and propeller planes, and I still believe that. I definitely think there should be. I think the P-51H deserves its spot in the limelight at the top of these super props that we have getting added to the game. I would love every match to play P-51H versus stuff like the J7 or versus Griffin Spitz. That to me actually makes Hokkaido interesting. A map which I've played on for nearly 4 years now, remembered all of the iterations of it, not that the maps change, but you know, the vehicles that you see on it. And with the P-51H, I would gladly play it every time if it was against Tempests, Tempest Mark IIs, Tempest Mark Vs, and late tier Griffin Spitz. It is just an amazing matchup, because it comes down to skill, and a lot of times in War Thunder, especially in aircraft, skill does come second. If you are in a 5-7 plane, facing a 6-7 plane, skill does come second, unfortunately. The only thing that skill benefits in that situation, if you're in the 5-7 plane, is if the 6-7 cocks up and you can utilize that. And that is a skill in itself, and should be admired, but it shouldn't be the only thing in your arsenal that you have. Because if you come up against a semi-decent pilot with a semi-decent plane, there is literally nothing that you can do against them. And that's how it feels when the P-51H gets up-tiered. But when it faces props, there's a balance in the force. It feels fun to fly. It is one of the aircraft that I've enjoyed over this last year or so. There have been a lot of aircraft which I've had fun flying, you know, I've done well in it, I can see it being a very good aircraft, but the P-51H is the first one where I feel like it's just fun. You have energy, you can gain energy quite quickly, especially in a straight line. You have slight advantages over Griffin Spitz depending on modifications. You can work out what modifications they have by if they're faster than you in a straight line, if they've come out of a dive, can they catch you? Can you climb as well as them? Are you sat in a situation where maybe you're at a slight disadvantage, but then you can make it back in different ways, such as going in a straight line, gaining speed, and then gaining altitude? Maybe you can use your teammates in some kind of counter-attack maneuver, which is something I try and set up, especially when I'm playing solo. But what happens is that you have this scenario where you're thinking constantly, you're looking at the map, you're seeing what's going on, you're enjoying the game as it's coming at you. And that is something that I just haven't felt in a very long time. Since those early days of the Tempest Mark V, where I was facing Bearcats. Because it felt like it mattered how I played the match. The matchup was so good and so fun, it generally mattered the skill and the tactics. And that's how I feel with this thing and the Griffin. I hope that one day we will get a wall between props and jets. I understand it would increase queue times. I understand that. I understand lower tier jets, maybe there would be more of a barrier to entry. But I'm a propeller pilot. I care about prop planes. There are many other people who advocate for jets in the game, especially YouTubers. For me, I'm a propeller head. I don't really care about jets. And when something like the P-51H gets added, and it gets added in a way which makes it so fun to fly, but then the majority of your games, I'd say 60 or 70%, are against jets, and they are obviously better than you in the form of the F-84G or the Horton, and can do everything that you can do but better. It's sad. It really is. Because it harpens back to the times where you remember, where you're on Hokkaido, or you're on Germany, and you're facing stuff like BF-109s, or you're facing stuff like Griffin Spitz, and you wish that every match was like that. But unfortunately they're not. Maybe one day they will, when we get a ton of players in the game, and we get an actual war between jets and props, and it can be justified from Gaijin's point of view. But unfortunately, today is not that day. At the same time, P-51H, still really fun to fly. Just watch out for those 7-3 matches. Once you get all the upgrades, you may stand a chance. But the stock grind against jets, it's no fun. Against props, it's a hell of a lot of fun. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.